I had an affair with my husband's childhood friend, and now I'm dealing with the consequences of my actions. Karma has hit me hard, and it's more punishing than I could ever express. They say karma is a tough teacher, and I'm starting to grasp the truth behind that saying. I made choices that exceeded what I should have, and now I'm facing the repercussions of my regrettable deeds. Cheating alone is bad enough, but when it involves a close friend, it's a whole new level of wrong. I find myself in this painful situation, burdened by the shame I've brought upon myself. Temptation is a powerful force that can challenge even the strongest of wills. Resisting something right in front of you takes immense self-discipline, and sadly, I succumbed to the temptation that was right in front of me, leading to a taboo I deeply regret. My story isn't a typical one, and my infidelity didn't happen overnight. It was a culmination of months, or perhaps even years, in the making. Before I delve further, let me provide some background about myself and my husband. I'm Christina, a 29-year-old makeup artist, and I've been married to Andrew, a 31-year-old accountant, for over 3 years. I first met Andrew when his sister hired me for a makeup session during her visit to New York. She wanted to celebrate her birthday with a photo shoot, so she booked me as her makeup artist based on a recommendation. Andrew wasn't home for most of the day and only returned when I had finished the makeup. He greeted me casually before heading upstairs. I felt quite shy when I saw him because Andrew was undeniably attractive. Before I continue, it's important to note that I also met Andrew's childhood friend when I came to do his sister's makeup. However, that story is forthcoming. I'm the type of woman who appreciates men that don't openly display their interest in me. I prefer men who behave as though they're not particularly interested. Yes, Reddit users, I understand that it may sound peculiar, but it's accurate. That's the kind of individual I am. On that day, when I observed how nonchalant Andrew was when he greeted me, I became fond of him. He appeared exceedingly fatigued and immediately retreated to his room. His sister is a rather cheerful person, and she informed me about her brother's diligent work ethic. She mentioned that he often returns from work late and exhausted. However, on that specific day, Andrew arrived home at 5 p.m., and that's when I had the opportunity to see him. I had already finished applying makeup, and the photographer was already at the house to take pictures. I had no other reason to remain, but when I caught sight of Andrew, I knew I couldn't leave. Yes, I was attracted to him from the moment I saw him. I don't mean it was love at first sight, but rather a sudden and whimsical attraction. Even now, as I reflect on it, I can't deny that my husband is genuinely handsome. It's no surprise that I felt drawn to him on that very first day. So, my fellow Reddit users, that attraction led me to make a rather foolish decision. I asked his sister if I could stay behind just to see how the pictures turned out and to assist with makeup touch-ups if necessary. Yes, I was that eager to capture Andrew's attention. The astonishing part is that Andrew took an eternity to emerge from the house that day. The photographer was nearly done with the pictures by the time I finally spotted Andrew making his way out. Imagine waiting for hours to see someone, and when they finally stand before you, all sense of reason seems to vanish. I couldn't muster the courage to approach him and strike up a conversation. Instead, it was his sister who took the initiative and asked if I had a crush on her brother. I initially tried to evade the question, but eventually I gave in and decided to be honest. She seemed excited about the idea of me being interested in him, but she also expressed a hint of sympathy for me. When I inquired why she felt sorry, she explained that Andrew was already in a committed relationship with a girlfriend. My fellow Reddit users, I felt genuinely heartbroken upon hearing this news. I know it may sound strange to be heartbroken when you haven't even dated the person, but it hit me hard. Have you ever had a crush on someone who was already in a relationship? It's a terribly painful feeling. What really got to me was the fact that I had spent hours waiting for him, hoping to start a conversation, only to learn that he was seriously involved with someone else. As a makeup artist, I couldn't help but calculate the amount of money I could have earned during the time I wasted daydreaming about someone I had barely met a few hours earlier. Since I no longer had a reason to stay, I packed up my makeup supplies and prepared to leave. That's when Andrew's sister did something that took me by surprise on many levels. She called her brother at the last minute and asked him to come and see me off. Yes, she actually did that. I was so embarrassed that I tried to subtly indicate that I wasn't interested in this gesture, but she paid no attention to my hints. Andrew, looking weary, walked over to us with a smile on his face. He complimented my makeup skills and said goodbye. Before heading back into the house, his sister made a comment about my crush on him. I swear, Reddit users, I wish the ground would swallow me up at that moment. Initially, Andrew thought his sister was just teasing, but when he saw my expression, he realized she was telling the truth. The situation felt incredibly awkward, and I wanted nothing more than to escape it. So I quickly left and headed home. 3 months later, I received a text from Andrew's sister. It turns out she was back in New York and needed another makeup tutorial. That's how I ended up meeting Andrew's childhood friend. Apparently, she was back in New York and needed another makeup tutorial. That's how I came to meet Andrew's childhood friend, Collins. While I was busy with Andrew's sister's makeup, Collins randomly came to the house. He was friends with Andrew's sister, whom I'll call Linda from now on, so Collins came over while I was occupied with Linda's makeup. He was friendly and even offered to assist me with the brushes and makeup items I needed during the makeup session. The three of us managed to chat while I worked, and I was pleased that the working environment was enjoyable and conducive. At a certain point during the makeup session, Collins requested my phone number. He insisted that he just wanted to help me find more clients. I didn't mind and gave him my phone number. I had already forgotten about my crush on Andrew because I honestly didn't think I would see him again. It was only a coincidence that Linda randomly asked me to be her makeup artist once more. Well, I was very wrong because I saw Andrew again. He came back from work to retrieve something before heading back. My fellow Reddit users, I really felt like the universe wanted us to meet again. But unfortunately for me, Andrew was in a rush. He went back to work immediately. Linda asked me if I still had feelings for him, and I brushed it off. I was not ready to go to that party. To be honest, I felt like a high school girl who was having a fling with someone that didn't even know her. The fact that he had a girlfriend was a huge turnoff because I was not ready to be that girl. That tried to steal someone else's boyfriend. Well, my fellow Reddit users, I did end up being that girl at the end of the day. 2 days after doing Linda's makeup, I got a call from Collins. He asked us to meet up for coffee, and I agreed. Collins was a nice guy, but he was not the man whose attention I wanted to get. But I didn't mind having a harmless coffee with him. After 3 weeks of randomly meeting up for coffee, Collins told me he had feelings for me. Okay, for someone who wanted to get the attention of his childhood best friend, I was not really excited. Andrea was the one I liked, but unfortunately, he was in a relationship. Collins seemed nice and all, but I found it weird to date the best friend of a guy I had feelings for. The outcome was bound to be unsatisfactory, so I decided to be less than honest with Collins and expressed that I wasn't prepared for a serious relationship. Before my talk with Collins, Linda had already cautioned me about his flirtatious nature, advising me not to take him too seriously. I didn't really heed her advice until Collins himself suggested we could simply have a casual encounter without any strings attached. I declined because I wasn't interested in that sort of arrangement. I'll keep this concise and focus on the key points. Linda found a job in New York and temporarily stayed with Andrew until she could find her own place. Consequently, Linda invited me to Collins's house regularly. During our visits, I would often experiment with new makeup techniques on Linda's face, and we'd try them together. Surprisingly, Linda and I grew very close, forging a friendship that I hadn't anticipated. I understand that many of you are wondering where Collins was throughout this time. Well, Collins was still in a relationship, and his girlfriend Sandra even visited their house on several occasions. Yes, I'm aware of what you might be thinking. It did hurt to see the guy I had feelings for with his girlfriend, but there was little I could do about it. As time passed, I got wind of Collins and Sandra taking a break in their relationship. I'm not privy to all the details, but I heard that Sandra had been relocated to work in another state. Collins wasn't ready for a long-distance relationship, so they decided to take a break to see how things would go. To put it briefly, I saw this as an opportunity to get Andrew's attention. I know it might sound desperate and awkward, but I really liked him and wanted to date him. We began chatting occasionally whenever I visited Linda, and that's how our friendship started. However, it was just a friendship. There was nothing more to it. Then, one day, Linda invited me over to help her with packing, as she had found a new apartment to move into. I knew this would be my last chance to see Andrew, so I decided to talk to him. I ended up staying overnight at their house because we were packing until very late. Linda suggested I stay over so that I could accompany her to the new apartment. That night, I met Andrew in the living room, and we started a casual conversation. He seemed quite sad about his sister moving out since he had grown accustomed to having her around. The three of us had a few drinks and watched movies together. Linda decided to call it a night early since she still had to finish packing for her move. My fellow Redditors, that's how I found myself alone in the living room with Andrew. I can't be sure if it was the alcohol we had consumed or the romantic movies we had watched, but we ended up spending the night together. When I woke up the next morning, I was worried that he might regret everything and tell me it was a mistake. But to my surprise, that wasn't the case. Oh my goodness, this story is turning out longer than I anticipated, dear Redditors. The main part of the story hasn't even begun yet. I just wanted to give you all some background to understand the dynamics between Collins, Andrew, and me. Speaking of Collins, if you're wondering where he was during all of this, I'll fill you in. A few months before Linda moved out, Collins experienced a loss in his family when his father passed away. He returned to his hometown to be with his grieving family. He explained that it was a challenging time for them, especially since his mother had also passed away previously. With 4 younger siblings to look after, he decided to stay in his hometown for a while to provide support and act as a father figure. Andrew and I started dating a few weeks after our intimate night at his house. I had some concerns that he might reconcile with his girlfriend, but I finally gathered the courage to ask him about it. He assured me that he had no plans of getting back together with Sandra because he wasn't ready for a long-distance relationship. Linda was genuinely thrilled that I was in a relationship with Andrew because she believed that I truly cared for him. Despite the distance, the bond between Andrew and Collins remained strong. They kept in touch, speaking to each other almost every week, and Collins even made efforts to send Andrew financial support from time to time. During this period, I lost contact with Collins, and it was mostly my doing. I had blocked him even before he left for his father's funeral because I wanted to avoid complicating matters. He had approached me multiple times, and my response had always been a firm no. I didn't want to continue causing him pain, so I made the choice to completely sever communication with Collins. Surprisingly, Collins had no knowledge of the relationship between Andrew and me. Perhaps Andrew didn't see the need to inform him, given that he wasn't aware of Collins's feelings for me. Additionally, Andrew was rarely home when Collins would flirt with me, so he remained oblivious to our interactions. I took Linda's advice to heart and didn't take Collins's advances seriously, believing he was simply a flirt. Andrew and I continued dating for 2 more years before he proposed, and I enthusiastically accepted, leading to our marriage. I want to emphasize this with all my sincerity. I love my husband deeply. My fellow Redditors, I have genuine, profound feelings for Andrew. From the very first day I laid eyes on him, I knew that I had strong emotions for him. Marrying him marked the happiest moment in my entire life. Even my family believed that there was no better match for me, and his family warmly welcomed me into their fold, making me feel at home. A few weeks before the wedding, Andrew informed Collins that he was getting married to the girl he had been dating for over 3 years. Collins was aware of Andrew's relationship, but was unaware that I was the one he was marrying. It's possible that Andrew didn't mention my name, or maybe Collins chose not to dwell on it. I'm uncertain which it is because when Collins returned to New York 2 weeks before the wedding, he was taken aback to discover that I was the bride. Collins pulled me aside and expressed his feelings, accusing me of using his childhood best friend to make him jealous. Yes, he actually said that. I had to clarify to Collins that I had harbored feelings for Andrew since the day I first laid eyes on him, regardless of his friendship with Collins. However, Collins didn't seem to grasp my explanation at all, and he appeared extremely agitated, which honestly frightened me. I didn't want Collins to jeopardize my relationship with Andrew, so I decided to confide in Linda about the situation. She promptly called Collins and provided a thorough explanation, including the fact that I had confided in her about my crush on Andrew from the very beginning. Ultimately, Collins chose to let go of his grievances and acknowledged that he had overreacted. I wanted to be transparent with Andrew, so I confided in him about everything. At first, Andrew appeared upset due to Collins's actions, but they had a candid conversation about it, and things were resolved. Collins assured Andrew that he was simply joking and wanted to tease me for fun. We all shared a laugh and moved forward, leading to a stress-free wedding 2 weeks later. Our life as a married couple began when I moved into Andrew's house after the wedding. It was a wonderful experience, and it felt empowering to confidently refer to someone as your husband and have that sense of mutual ownership and respect in our marriage. I fell in love with the way Andrew treated me, and we continued to show respect for each other in our relationship. I continued my job as a makeup artist, staying busy, while Andrew was also occupied with work. However, we managed to find time for occasional dates and trips, and everything seemed perfect. I never imagined that I'd find a reason to come to Reddit and share how my marriage took a dramatic turn, all because of me. Yes, it was my responsibility. While others played a role, the ultimate decision to succumb to temptation rested with me. I got carried away, and I've now jeopardized everything that Andrew and I worked so hard to build. I cheated. I cheated on my husband, something I never thought I would do. I never imagined it would come to this point, and now I deeply regret letting anything come between me and my husband. If you're thinking Collins played a part in this, you're correct. However, you probably wouldn't have guessed that Sandra, his ex-girlfriend, also played a role, right? Well, Sandra is very much entangled in this situation. So, in a way, everyone involved shares some responsibility, but ultimately, the blame falls on me. As for Andrew, I can't say he's entirely blameless. One day, Linda urgently invited me to her apartment, and it caught me off guard. Prior to that, Linda had often invited me over for various reasons, and our friendship had remained strong. When I arrived at her place, she was visibly anxious, so I inquired about the issue. Linda informed me that an unexpected guest had returned to New York, and that guest was Sandra. In a typical relationship, one's husband's ex-girlfriend shouldn't be a major concern. In my particular case, this situation bothered me significantly. The fact that Sandra and Andrew had been in a deeply committed relationship, and their breakup was solely due to long-distance work-related challenges, raised concerns for me. Their separation wasn't prompted by a loss of love or similar issues, but rather the difficulties of maintaining a relationship from afar. It truly scared me, and I dreaded the possibility of Sandra attempting to reconcile with him. There was a strong likelihood she would make an effort, and I was well aware of it. I understood that even Andrew's marriage wouldn't necessarily deter her if she desired to be with him. Linda tried to reassure me, but my anxiety had already spiraled out of control. I genuinely believed my marriage was in jeopardy, but Linda helped me realize I was overreacting. She advised me not to dwell on it too much, and informed me simply to prevent me from overreacting later. We all know that some things are easier said than done, and my situation was no exception. I had a lot on the line, so I decided to return home and gather my thoughts. That day, I struggled to sleep. I was desperate to find out if Andrew was aware of Sandra's return to New York. My fellow Redditors, I cannot adequately convey how uneasy I felt that night. It had reached a point where even Andrew noticed that I wasn't myself. He inquired about my well-being, and I told him I had something on my mind but insisted it wasn't a significant concern. Andrew didn't buy my explanation, though. Despite his exhaustion from a long day at work, he insisted I share what was troubling me before going to sleep. When I finally revealed that Sandra had returned to New York, Andrew didn't appear surprised. Yes, Redditors, it seemed Andrew had knowledge of Sandra's arrival. If I was anxious before, this knowledge only heightened my anxiety. I questioned him about how he knew, and he disclosed that she had recently reached out to him and asked to meet for coffee. Let me be clear, I'm not sure if I might sound paranoid or overly dramatic, but I didn't take his words lightly at all. Any woman would likely be upset if she discovered her husband's ex-girlfriend had invited him for coffee. In my situation, I felt even more apprehensive. I was well aware of their history, and I knew that they hadn't faced significant issues during their previous relationship. I'm not one to keep my feelings to myself, so I immediately expressed to my husband that I didn't want him to meet with Sandra. He inquired about the reason, and I openly shared my concerns. We had never kept secrets from each other, so I felt at ease expressing my unhappiness about Sandra's return. In typical fashion for men in such situations, he reassured me and tried to convince me that there was nothing more to his meeting with Sandra. He insisted she was still his friend, and he simply wanted to catch up with her. I didn't want to appear overly protective, so I didn't press the matter further. He did have a valid point since they had known each other long before I came into the picture. I did, however, ask him to promise that he'd return within an hour, which he did. I won't deny that I still had lingering worries. A week later, they had their coffee meetup, and we carried on with our lives. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Sandra was persistently trying to contact Andrew. My suspicion grew due to the frequent, sudden phone calls he received. He'd either silence his phone or abruptly end the calls. But I sensed something was amiss. I managed to suppress my suspicions for another 3 months, until an unexpected turn of events occurred. Collins returned to New York with his siblings. He had accumulated enough savings in his hometown over the years, so he decided to come back to New York with 2 of his siblings. I hadn't anticipated Collins's return at all, and it genuinely caught me off guard. At this point, I felt like all the issues from my past were resurfacing. To clarify, I had never been in a romantic relationship with Collins. We were simply friends, and I had declined his advances. We had moved past that, and he had even attended my wedding. There shouldn't have been any cause for concern, but I was increasingly distressed. My unease was compounded by the fact that Sandra seemed to be persistently reaching out to my husband. I had seen her missed calls on his phone, and it appeared that, despite Andrew's attempts to ignore her advances, she was still pursuing him. I knew it was only a matter of time before he might give in, or her actions would escalate. I discussed my concerns with Linda, and she reassured me that Andrew would never betray me. I placed my trust in her words and attempted to calm my anxieties. Unexpectedly, Collins became a source of annoyance. Given his deep, long-standing friendship with my husband, it made sense that he started visiting our home more often. Initially, he brought his siblings along, emphasizing how he was playing a significant fatherly role in their lives. Andrew didn't seem bothered by Collins's frequent visits, likely due to their strong bond. You've probably heard stories about women accused of driving a wedge between their husbands and their friends or family members. I was determined not to be that kind of wife and avoid any such accusations. Consequently, I made a sincere effort not to let my discomfort with Collins's visits show. I didn't want to suddenly inform my husband that I no longer wanted his best friend around our house. Collins, however, took my silence as an endorsement. He began visiting even more frequently and helping himself to food from our refrigerator without asking. While he technically didn't need to ask, as I was just his friend's wife, it was clear he did these things to provoke me and potentially strain my relationship with my husband. My intention was to handle everything with maturity and reasonableness. One day, I decided to discuss the situation with my husband, informing him about Collins's behavior, which I found disagreeable. My husband granted me permission to address the issue with Collins and opted not to take sides or become involved in our disagreements. To be honest, I was upset with his response. I didn't want him to choose sides. All I desired was for him to ask his friend to tone down his visits and behavior. It seemed, however, that my request was too much to ask, so I took matters into my own hands. I had a disagreement with Andrew about the situation, but eventually, I chose to let it go because I suspected that it was exactly what Collins had intended all along. It was unfortunate that my husband couldn't see that his childhood best friend was actively working to disrupt our marriage. One day, I decided to have a conversation with Collins about the matter. I expressed my dislike for his frequent visits and the way he freely helped himself in the kitchen without asking for permission. This conversation led to Collins becoming quite angry, and he abruptly left the house. This wasn't my intention, so I informed my husband about what transpired and asked him to reach out to Collins on my behalf. I had blocked Collins's phone number, and I had no intention of unblocking it. My emotions were running high, and I was feeling very frustrated. It seemed like my husband was inclined to side with Collins, so I reached a point where I decided to stop concerning myself with Collins's presence. I allowed him to do as he pleased, especially since the actual homeowner, my husband, didn't seem to mind. I chose not to discuss the matter with Linda because I didn't want to keep bothering her with every little disagreement between my husband and me. I aimed to handle the situation independently without burdening her. By that point, I had completely forgotten about Sandra and her presence in New York. She didn't even cross my mind, nor did I consider that she might still be attempting to contact Andrew. However, one day, something happened that I couldn't quite comprehend. That was the same day I made a regrettable mistake by cheating on my husband with Collins. I still feel remorseful about every detail of that day, but all I can do now is drown in self-pity. On that particular day, it was raining heavily, and the rain had been persistent since the previous night. Andrew had managed to leave for work when the rain temporarily stopped. After he departed, Collins suddenly showed up at our doorstep, explaining that he had forgotten his work file at our place. Indeed, he showed up that frequently, almost resembling a tenant in our home. After retrieving his work file, he inquired if he could stay for brunch. I was well aware that this was his way of cornering me. Refusing would likely lead him to concoct stories to tell Andrew. I obliged and served him brunch, and as he ate, the rain resumed, heavy and unrelenting. It seemed like the rain had no intention of letting up. Given the inclement weather, Collins couldn't safely drive back. I became genuinely concerned about the prospect of Collins being stuck late into the day due to the heavy rain. I didn't want him out in such weather for too long, both for his safety and the nagging suspicion that Sandra might attempt something. Part of me questioned whether I was overreacting, but I needed to ensure everything was above board. Consequently, my fellow Redditors, as it neared 5 p.m., I placed a call to my husband, who informed me that driving in the weather was practically impossible. He anticipated arriving home late. This heightened my concern, especially since Collins couldn't leave either. To calm my nerves, I retreated to my room, took a hot bath, and changed into my pajamas. Hunger gnawed at me, and I knew Collins must be hungry as well. I hadn't prepared a proper meal in the afternoon, only snacking. I hadn't expected him to stay for such an extended period. After preparing dinner and offering it to him, I remained in the living room, watching a movie. I wanted to be present when my husband returned and didn't wish to doze off before his arrival. Furthermore, I felt uneasy about leaving Collins alone in the house with my husband while I retreated to my room. I didn't entirely trust him not to snoop around our belongings. Collins chose to stay in the living room and join me in watching the movie. Initially, it was silent, and neither of us attempted to strike up a conversation. However, after a while, Collins began to inquire about my makeup business, and that's when our conversation started. We engaged in conversation about various life topics and random subjects. As we delved into the second movie, Collins moved closer to me on the couch, and our shoulders were nearly touching. I didn't find this position uncomfortable initially, so I shifted away and occupied a different couch. Once again, our shoulders were practically touching. His reaction was laughter, and he rejoined me on the couch. Collins left me with little personal space to gather my thoughts. He complimented my appearance and confessed he still missed me. His speech became incoherent, and I began to suspect he might be intoxicated, even though I hadn't seen him consume any alcohol. I pushed him away and issued a stern warning to cease his advances, threatening to call my husband and reveal everything. To my surprise, Collins scoffed at the mention of me calling my husband. He derided me as a fool and declared that I was naive to believe he had been faithful. I dismissed his rants as nonsense and tried to make my way upstairs. I recognized that his words were affecting me, and I didn't want him to manipulate my thoughts. However, fellow Redditors, I ultimately succumbed to his manipulation. Collins inquired if I was aware of Sandra's return to New York. This piqued my interest, and in an attempt to demonstrate transparency in my relationship with Andrew, I admitted my knowledge of the matter. He retrieved his phone and displayed images of Sandra standing in front of Andrew's workplace. According to Collins, Sandra had been making efforts to contact Andrew and had visited his workplace on multiple occasions. While I may have been reluctant to trust Collins, the photographic evidence before me couldn't be denied. Collins also asserted that Sandra was at Andrew's workplace at that very moment, possibly engaged in an intimate encounter. This revelation left me in shock, prompting me to reach for my phone and call Andrew. After 2 additional unanswered calls, Andrew still hadn't picked up. Collins chuckled once more and asserted that he was being truthful. He even presented a photo of Andrew and Sandra meeting for lunch as evidence. Regrettably, I succumbed to manipulation and foolishly believed his every word. Overwhelmed with emotion, I began crying uncontrollably, convinced that Andrew was betraying our relationship. Collins, attempting to console me, offered a comforting hug. It was during this embrace that his actions escalated, and I, foolishly, allowed myself to be carried away. In my misguided state of mind, I believed I was seeking revenge for Andrew's perceived deceit, and I ended up engaging in a physical relationship with Collins. Eventually, we both fell asleep on the couch. That same night, I awoke to the shock of cold water splashed on me. My husband stood there, glaring at me with disgust in his eyes. The rain had ceased, and upon returning home, he had discovered me naked on the couch with his best friend. Initially, I felt guilt, but I quickly retaliated by accusing him of infidelity. I recounted everything that Collins had told me, and my husband's reaction was extreme. He slapped me so forcefully that I tumbled to the floor. He came dangerously close to harming Collins right then and there in our living room. As it turned out, Collins had indeed lied to me. The photographs of Sandra outside Andrew's office were authentic, but Andrew had never intentionally met up with her. The image of them having lunch together had been taken before I even knew him. My paranoia and manipulation had clouded my judgment, preventing me from seeing the actual truth. After giving Collins a severe reprimand, Andrew ejected him from our home. The words he uttered that night still haunt me to this day. He was furious, disappointed, and consumed by anger. He expelled me from the house in the dead of night with only my pajamas, and I had nowhere else to turn. That very night, I sought refuge at Linda's place, despite her understandable trepidation upon seeing me in such a deplorable state. After disclosing the entire ordeal to her, Linda expressed her deep disappointment in my failure to heed her earlier warnings. She couldn't even bring herself to make eye contact with me. She allowed me to stay at her place for just 2 days before insisting that I leave. She explained that she couldn't go against her brother's wishes for my sake. Only my parents agreed to take me in, though they still regard me with disappointment in their eyes. I endured a miserable existence for 2 months. I made attempts to reach out to Andrew and even paid him visits, but he instructed the gatekeeper never to admit me and blocked my number. Just last month, I received word from a friend that Andrew and Sandra have rekindled their relationship. Upon hearing this news, I was nearly driven to end my own life. I've lost everything, and I can only blame myself. Not even Linda is willing to listen to me. 2 weeks ago, Andrew sent me divorce papers, and I've yet to sign them. I intend to do so soon because all hope seems to be lost. My marriage is no more, and I've lost a dear friend. I betrayed my husband by engaging in a physical relationship with his lifelong friend. Even though I was led to believe he was unfaithful, 2 wrongs don't justify each other, and I should never have sought revenge through infidelity. In the end, he wasn't unfaithful at all. It was all a ruse. Perhaps I was meant to learn my lesson the hard way. I am responsible for everything, and I deeply regret my actions. I have destroyed everything with my own hands.